I'm Mike Moreno. I work on the public sector VC and startups team at AWS. I focus on space and national security startups. I have a really great panel here. I'm going to go and let you introduce yourselves around the room. Just give us a sense of who you are, where you work now, and why you're excited about space. So let's start with Amir.
Hey, Michael. Great to be on with you all. Great to see some friends on here as well. And I'm the Chief Business Officer at Axiom Space. We today send missions to the International Space Station while building the new space station that is going to replace ISS sometime around 2028, 2030. And I am excited about space because it is a huge opportunity to advance the state of humanity and human knowledge. There's a massive economic opportunity in expanding human opportunity in space, and because it brings the kid out in all of us.
Thanks, Amir. How about Monica?
Hi, I'm Monica Jan. I'm a Senior Director of Strategy and Customer Experience at Virgin Orbit. So Virgin Orbit, we make rockets, but we launch them from a 747 airplane. So I think that's kind of cool. So for my job, I get to drive the strategy roadmap and also work with a lot of our international partners, building spaceports and brings access to space to different parts of the world where they may not be able to build their own rockets before. I think it's really exciting. I agree with everything that Amir said. Very well said, by the way. And I think for me, the global participation now at a very unprecedented level, I think that's very exciting.
Jeff Ryder.
Good afternoon, everybody. Hey, Michael, good to see you. My name is Jeff Ryder. I'm with GM Defense. We are a subsidiary of General Motors, and we're a group within GM that's focused on purpose-built applications for government markets. So we're a startup within the giant company that is General Motors, and we're excited because on the face of it, I wouldn't say that space was a market that we all thought of when we launched GM Defense and we're looking at government markets, but we'll talk more about why we're interested. But for lunar mobility and the opportunity for GM to participate with different capabilities, space is an exciting new market, and we're super excited to be here today. So really appreciate the invitation.
Great. Thanks, Jeff. That's perfect. I'm going to save my first question for you then. You get to kick it off. And last but not least, Gareth Keane.
Hey, Michael. Thank you. I just want to say thanks to you and to the organizers for including us. Really excited to be part of this event. I'm Gareth. I'm a partner with Promus Ventures. Quick overview of us. We're a pretty active seed and early stage venture capital fund. We have a team based across the US and Europe, and we look to fund people solving really hard problems with deep technology. Space is a big focus for us. We're investors all the way from launch. We're an investor in Rocket Lab through constellations like Spire and ISI, and then a whole host of downstream applications. And I'm excited about space because I think Amir said it very well. It is really a sort of the next frontier for sort of human evolution and human expansion, and I'm excited to be part of it.
Thanks, Gareth, and welcome everyone again. I'm excited about space too. I think we're all here for a reason. And we're talking, the title for this panel is The Next Phase in Space. And I hear a lot about new space, about the space innovation economy, about space adjacent markets. So Jeff Ryder, I promised you this one, and then to anyone else, how do you define the space industry today that we're talking about?
You know, I've spent a lot of background in the space sector, long career in aerospace and defense, started work on reusable launch vehicles and launch industry and satellites, and have worked across civil and military space. So it just feels like in the past decade or so, the entire industry and market have opened up, and not only to new opportunities, but new competitors. So at GM, I would say we've really pivoted in a lot of ways around different market applications. And so for GM Defense, we're looking at government purpose-built applications, and we're not limiting that to vehicles. So I'll reference batteries as an example where we have tremendous capability, safety, qualification, testing, electrification, what we're doing with autonomy. And then a lot of our advanced manufacturing capabilities. When you look at companies like GM and you look at the opportunities that are emerging in space, there are a lot of ways where if companies kind of just turn 90 degrees or kind of take what they do and look at it a different way, there are a lot of opportunities to participate in this market. So in our case, it is an interest in electrification and mobility. But I'd like to think we're an example of the type of company, and that there are many companies, if looking at the space sector, there's a lot of room for growth. There's a lot of room to bring new business models in. I think because we're a commercial company and a lot of the incumbents in the space have different business model. There's opportunity to kind of not just the what you do, but how you do it. And so whether we're looking at systems or components, there's an opportunity here that I would just say on the face of it probably surprised folks at GM initially, but there really is an exciting path forward for us in this, I say, emergent space market, and just really excited to be here today. So appreciate the invitation.
Thanks, Jeff. And I apologize, Jeff Cruz. Yes, I clicked right on the gallery view, and I see that you joined us. So please introduce yourself quickly, and then maybe take a shot at this question. What is the space industry to you?
Sure. Thank you for having me. I'm Jeff. I'm the investment manager at Seraphim Capital, a space tech specialist fund investing in seed and Series A globally. And then what's interesting, or why am I excited about space? I think we're still very early on. I think it's sort of an embryonic industry. A lot of it has been enabled by SpaceX and the Falcon 9, but I think Starship's right around the corner, and so we're going to see another new phase of space tech. And so I'm really excited about that.
Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I might just build on what Jeff said. I think our view of space is driven by our thesis as investors, which is very data driven. So we actually look at sort of space as a source of really interesting data sets that will have application in sort of a non-terrestrial context, but very much applicable in the terrestrial context as well. And I think one way to sort of even sort of frame that for people is you look at sort of global position navigation timing solutions, which underpin trillions of dollars in the world economy, whether it's transportation, logistics, timing of financial transactions, all these really, really important things. There's we feel a whole host of applications that we're really just sort of starting to understand that sort of PNT solutions enable. And we're excited about helping entrepreneurs to build companies to solve those problems.
Add on to that also, Jeff and Gareth just planted a couple seeds in my head about the space industry and how we define it. So, if you look at Bryce's reports or Space Foundation or any of the big banks, they talk about space as this $400 billion market today that by 2040 is going to grow to be $1 trillion, or depending who you talk with, something around that number. And so Jeff from GM was talking about space providing an opportunity to look at innovation in a different way. And so, of course, take microgravity as an opportunity there for manufacturing, and that's a hugely different physical environment and opens up all sorts of opportunities in everything from pharmaceuticals to material science to communications technologies. Jeff from Seraphim said that space is it's an embryonic phase, which indeed it is. And so so if we look at that pie chart that Bryce or some of the others put out about what space is comprised of today, a massive part of it is broadcast, is satellites, and only a very small slice of it is exploration, human activity off planet, and really nothing in manufacturing, and definitely nothing in building cities off the planet. So I think the next 15, 20 years is going to offer a lot of opportunity in the redefinition of what the strategic high ground means. And we already see that in orbit and with the moon, and I think we'll see more of that. I think the manufacturing pie will grow immensely. I think is really going to end up being one of the slices of the pie that changes the makeup of the whole pie. So I think we'll see the broadband become not less important, but overall proportionally a smaller part of the whole space economy. And I think we'll really start to see exploration and manufacturing become a significant part of this industry.
How is this conversation different than it would have been 10 years ago? And why are we at an inflection point? What's unique about today? Monica, how about you start?
Gosh, where do we start? So many things are different, but I think mainly the cost, right? The cost of both access and building space assets has come down significantly. We're able to now leveraging a lot of the commercial off-the-shelf technology to build space assets. Whereas 10 years ago, you're looking at a large geosat for the numbers in the billions of dollars range. Today, you're looking at millions or even less. University students are now sending experiments up to space. So I think that really opened up a lot of creative business cases and business models. And that coupled with the influx of private funding, where we're really seeing in the last few years the privatization of space. And as I mentioned earlier, it's not just the U.S., it's not just Russia, it's not a Cold War. It's at a global scale level, and it seems to be continue to grow. I think that fundamentally changed the whole entire paradigm.
There's lots of cool hardware and technology or hardware that's being produced that is much cheaper nowadays. But also, if we look a bit more downstream, 10 years ago we didn't have the same kind of AI and machine learning capabilities we have today. We're now at the trillion parameter model size. So our capabilities have just grown exponentially with those sorts of technologies. So we can actually make better sense of all of this EO data like we couldn't before.
Thanks,
I'd like
Jeff.
to also add that there's the human factor here of awareness and access. I remember 1985 sitting in a Pizza Hut in the Valley here in Los Angeles with a bunch of people called themselves back then the sysops of the BBSs, if you all remember, and we're all super nerds with a bunch of wires coming into our home from the pole on the street so we could run these internet sites. 1999, I was building the first voice over IP call center. 2010, the whole world's on the internet, and 2020 is just part of the fabric of society. And we're seeing that with space right now, where all of a sudden there's this broad understanding across all of the young innovators on the planet and in CTOs within companies that from defense contractors all the way down to little startups, that there is this thing there that wasn't available in the past that's suddenly accessible. You got high school kids sending mixed sticks to space for experiments. These kids are going to be at the early stage of their careers in 5-10 years from now. So that whole part of that evolution is happening. I think it's inevitable that we'll see a mirroring of the internet pattern in space.
We talk a lot about the reduced cost to access, the reduced cost to launch payloads, increased sensor capacity, and lower cost of sensors. So the barriers to entry are going down. And then I also hear a lot about barriers to exit when it comes to investment. So let's put our investor hats on. And I talk to a lot of VCs who, like some of you folks, are love space and invest in space. And then more of my friends who are VCs are unfortunately not yet ready to invest in space. They talk about high CapEx with long time horizons to exit. So what will be the tipping point when we stop hearing about those obstacles in space investments?
So I can take a run at this for starters. I'm sure lots of other people have opinions as well. I think, it's kind of important, I think, to realize that there's a set of investors who have been deep tech or sort of hard tech investors all the way along. And you'll find that most of them are comfortable with the time horizons and the complexity and some of the challenges around doing something like a space investment. I think as we see more exits come to fruition, that there will be potentially more appetite from the wider universe of investors. I do think, though, that entrepreneurs are probably best served currently by investors who understand the complexities of things like ITU filings to get spectrum if you're trying to do something involving radios from space, right? That stuff is super complicated. And if you don't have help at the board level to help you navigate that complexity, I'm not sure that, a cat, photo sharing app investor from the Valley is going to be able to add that much value to your board, to be honest, not being able to sort of navigate that or help you navigate that. I do think, though, that there's been some really interesting developments in the public markets around these special purpose acquisition company vehicles, which, if you look at sort of the new space ecosystem, I think there's 8 or 9 companies have announced, pure new space companies, lots of LiDAR companies and autonomy companies and other things sort of in that deep tech universe, but 8 or 9 pure space companies have announced SPAC transactions. And as they sort of, make their way through the process and actually get out into the markets, I think we'll see the public appetite and excitement around space companies will be there. And that, I think, will drive much more enthusiasm on the sort of private investor side to tee up some companies to go through that process. But if you look at large investors like the Tigers and the Temasics and people like this, the kind of crossover investors, they're actively deploying lots and lots of money into late stage space companies. So, I think we're getting to that tipping point where it becomes much more feasible for the average investor to be comfortable with the space investment. And I would love to get perspective from Amir or somebody who's raised, large amounts of money from, I think, non-traditional VC investors, Amir, it would probably be a good way to characterize them, right? People who just have a different appetite, different sort of time horizon, different tolerance for risk.
Yeah, I mean, we've had everybody from space subject matter experts like Hemisphere Ventures to super angels like Dylan Taylor, all the way up to institutional investors like Washington University. So the more we have that kind of institutional involvement, the more it becomes easier for the other folks that you mentioned, like the Temasics of the world, the Ontaros, to come into this because one, there's FOMO, two, they don't feel like they're alone, and three, they can look back at the institutional level due diligence that's been done already and come in and see, oh yeah, there's a valuation floor here. Oh yeah, there's a real market here. Oh yeah, there's all the other ingredients are in play, and that rigor has already been passed. So I think for individual companies, that's going to open access. I think, like you said, for the investment community at broad, it's about the combination of FOMO, case studies, exits. I know, Michael, you've got a lot of expertise in the, as we talked about it, the alphabet soup of funding from government, the AFWorks and others. So all those ingredients together make it easier for investors to come in.
Yeah, I might add an additional thought to this, which is the interesting collaboration where there are going to be emerging applications, new market opportunities, and how companies approach this market and find a niche for themselves, and whether it's through creative financial ventures and models or industry collaboration. I would just say I believe we're an example of a company who's not certainly not a space company, but where there's interest, the need to find partners and really focus on specific capabilities that, again, if you think about it, one way it's purpose-built versus an application. When you look at the space sector and you find the right partner, I think we're going to see more of that. So I would also talk about the relationship between big companies and small companies. There's so much innovation that's been emerging here for the last 5 years in particular. It's been going on longer than that, but access to low Earth orbit has just introduced incredible opportunity for a lot of small companies who otherwise, I think the barrier to investment has been, perhaps too significant. So we're seeing a lot more types of companies in this space, but given that there are large companies with long histories here, how they navigate this new space and how industry collaborates between the large, what I'd say, incumbents, new commercial companies that are interested, and this massive, portfolio of small emerging companies. I think there's just a lot of opportunity to, network. And I think maybe that's the purpose of this event, is to understand that there are a lot of different stakeholders in this community now. And I don't think that's the way, just fundamentally from an industry structure, you go back 30 years, it was completely the polar opposite, right? Purpose-built, large companies pursuing very specific requirements. Today, I don't say wide open, but in some cases wide open, in other cases, somewhat bespoke, but a lot of opportunities for companies to think creatively about what they do and how they can get a piece of this emerging, growth market.
One thing I might add is, and I agree with everyone, to expand on the sort of alphabet soup of funding from the government. It's not just the U.S., even though they are the largest, most consistent customer in the space industry. Space is sort of a national priority for a lot of companies across the globe. And so we're seeing more and more funding dollars put towards, innovation within space tech. And then, what I would also add is, and Jeff sort of touched on this, which is, it's been dominated by prime contractors for a long time. They're not known for being, the most innovative and fast-moving companies in the world. And so it's something that startups are very happy to chip away at this point. And we're starting to see that, with companies, like Palantir and Anduril, sort of take that position, satellite or SpaceX as well. So,
hey, Jeff Cruzy, while I have you, Amir mentioned SPACs, and I have it from a Seraphim report you might have written this year that in Q1 2021, there were 8 space SPACs announced with $6 billion of funding committed. That's a pretty significant increase from all of 2020. So any thoughts on SPACs, the impact of SPACs on the space industry, and how you see that panning out in the next few years?
Yeah, I think, at face value, SPACs are well positioned to fill a funding gap for what are typically seen as more capital intensive companies that give them, access to a large sum and, runway for a long period of time. So that's great. I think part of the challenge is, some of the SPACs might be with companies that are a little bit too early, in my opinion. And we could see some fallout as a result. But I think in the bigger picture of things, this is actually very good because it opens up a liquidity pathway for space tech companies that really didn't exist before. And so, I think there's also sort of like the Elon effect. There's a lot more retail interest as well. And then, a little bit of hangover from people that didn't get to invest in SpaceX, and now they want to invest in some kind of a space company. And then I think what's also, should be flagged is that we've been in sort of a low interest rate environment for quite a long time. And people or investors are seeking returns, outside of commercial paper or debt. And so, that they've been pouring more and more money into equity markets. If inflation rears its ugly head, which I think a lot of people are now expecting that to be the case in the midterm, then we could see some pullback in terms of investment on the public side, which eventually does fall down in the private side. But just something to keep in mind in terms of the dynamic of SPACs.
I'm waiting to see if there are any other thoughts on SPACs.
I mean, personally, we're being very cautious about it, as a strategy for going public as a company, because we know that, the pendulum swings on SPACs every 10, 15 years. There's a wave. Then there's the dual reality of whether the de-SPACs happen. It's not just getting into the SPAC, it's completing the SPAC with the pipe. That's the big deal. And then there's the SEC smackdown that typically follows. And so, we don't want to be subject to market sentiment. So anything that we would do as a company, if we did choose the SPAC route, would be only if we had a very, very durable capital plan that includes both raising significantly more money than we would need for, a 4 or 5 year cycle, so that if there is a downturn market sentiment, it doesn't affect us. We'd want to make sure that we'd have the right investors going into the SPAC in the pipe, so that these are long-term holders and not flippers. And I think that it's important that the companies that go into using this mechanism are doing it with those ingredients. Otherwise, they will hurt how the capital markets look at space companies. So hopefully the folks that have gone into these 8 or 9 SPACs, or I think it's now 10 space SPACs, thought about all that stuff as they were going in. But in any case, for us personally, we're trying to set up strategies for our company where, regardless of what ends up happening in the market and the perception of SPACs, we'll come out strong.
Yeah, I might just add sort of one note to both Amir and Jeff. I think one thing we think about a lot when it comes to companies going through a SPAC transaction, I think Jeff was spot on. There are companies for whom it makes a lot of sense, and there are a lot of companies for whom it probably doesn't make that much sense. And I think we also look at it from a defensive perspective. We have a number of portfolio companies where we're pretty sure some of their private market competitors are thinking about a SPAC. And if a competitor suddenly ends up with $300, $400 million on its balance sheet, we may feel they're not quite as good a company, given that we have our bias towards our own portfolio companies. But you can make a lot of mistakes with $300, $400 million worth of capital and recover from those mistakes. So it sort of is almost a defensive sort of consideration for us, right? What happens if one of our leading competitors for a constellation suddenly ends up with a huge amount of money on their balance sheet? What does that mean for us? How do we think about sort of responding to that? So it's kind of another piece of the calculus when you come to it from the investment side.
Great. I appreciate hearing it from both sides, the investor and the startups that are raising this money and that might be entertaining these conversations. I think that's pretty useful. Monica, I have a question for you, and then of course anyone else, and also a bonus question from the audience specifically for you. So the first is, what does it take to get people to invest in the vision of your company? And how do you balance good storytelling with good technology? What does it take to sell folks on that vision? And then the bonus question from Monica in the audience, what is the latest on when the next Launcher One launch will take place?
I'll answer the second question first. That's easier. We're expecting, the public announcement was last week of June. And as you can see, last week of June is coming quickly to next week. So I'll leave it at that. There should be a public announcement coming out very soon. So the company is all very busy and excited at the moment. Let's see, storytelling. As a startup company, you have to tell a story to raise funding. But I always believe that it's not just storytelling, it's be able to narrate your vision appropriately. And that should be grounded in some truth. I think the problem that I see is, I think back to what Amir is saying, Some of the investment that has been made probably could have used a little bit more due diligence, and that may be the outcome of some storytelling that may not have a good of a understanding of the market or good enough analysis of their business model to begin with. So I think the balance there really should be when you're creating that narrative with investment community to help them understand your vision, your technology, especially for deep tech, something's high capex, long return, has a lot of risk. You really have to put people's mind at ease. You got to be able to help them understand the roadmap and be able to deliver. So I think traction and be able to hit the milestones and have good, credible people on your team. I think those are some of the very crucial elements to be able to back up your story. I still think it's more of a vision. For us, when we spun off in 2017, nobody knew who we were, and there's a lot of skepticism. What we did was we brought a lot of people to our factory, just show them what we've done and not tell them what we're going to do. And I've always seen a huge immediate attitude change when they step in the factory and go, oh, wow, okay, you built all these. So you're not just saying you're going to, but you already built all these. And we continue to put out announcements on what we've done, not what we're going to do. I think that's where the important balance lies.
I have another question about deep tech companies in general, because this is a conference on deep tech. Similar and maybe overlapping, what are generally the challenges that deep tech companies face, and how can we overcome them, both as founders and investors, and particularly in this case in space?
I would propose, and I apologize if I'm not being trendy in this or counter trend in this, is to replace vision, narrative, story, all these things that we've been talking about in the last decade, with going back to old school business plan, customer base, and an economic purpose or a strategic purpose, whether it's maintaining U.S. global competitiveness or whether it's owning market share. So that's one thing is just keeping it basic and making sure that the business really is a business. And then from the deep tech side that you just mentioned is having a team that has the experience to execute on what the plan is and has direct experience. It's operating within a constellation of partners where there's some very serious, well-based relationships. For example, for us, we've got the station. So what's really our deep relationship with the launch provider, or with the upstream folks that are building the hulls of our station, or with the 100 providers that are providing the different subsystems, and very importantly with the big customers, which for us are the space agencies. So if you're looking at a company and they don't have any of those ingredients, and the story really is more just about PowerPoint engineering, and there's not real substance under that, that's the delta.
I tend to agree, and I think one of the ways I've articulated that over the years is, vision's fine, but if you can't show the intermediate steps it takes to get there, and what the proof points or validation will be along the way to get you there, then it's just a pipe dream, in my opinion. And so, it needs to definitely be grounded in reality. I agree with Monica and I agree with Amir.
The only thing I would add to that is I think it's, business case, business planning, nothing's changed, right? You got to have the facts, you got to have the data, you got to have the economics lined up. But it is an interesting thing to watch how people get excited about something that they might, if they don't have a background in say space and you have a vision for it, it really gets folks excited. So there is an excitement, there is a wow factor to it that I think is important from a recruitment standpoint and retention. And you're just talking about, the war for talent is driven to some extent by getting people excited. So, you have to have the economics lined up, but a compelling vision, is a good way to get folks motivated to work on. These are really, awesome, hard problems that everybody wants to solve, and you need your best people to do it. So I just mentioned that because I see that being a factor in, getting people, good people, great people to work hard problems. Those two go hand in hand. And a lot of that, they don't get as excited about the detailed economic case. Let the business planners do that. But when you want to pull people in, you have to have a compelling vision. So I think the two go hand in hand.
Yeah, I just might throw on a couple of other thoughts on there. I think it depends as well on the stage that you're investing at. When a a company is very far along in terms of execution, like Virgin Launch, like Axiom is right now in terms of like a real revenues and sort of real sort of contracts being signed. I think there it becomes much more of a sort of business model, ROI, sort of numbers driven investment decision. I think where Seraphim, for example, invest and where we like to play as well, sort of super early at sort of the seed, very early Series A stage, that's where sort of the team and the vision are maybe sort of weighted a little bit more heavily by us, because we're fundamentally investing in the entrepreneur and the founding team, right? We believe they're going to go out and run through walls and make things happen and just, get that magic alchemy of ideas and, people and money to come together and result in a good outcome. I think stepping back and thinking about it very abstractly, there are sort of three questions that I would ask a really early stage founder. Number one is, why you or why this team? Or what's your background? What's unique? What experience do you have that makes me confident that you're going to go out and build a great company in this particular sector? Number two would be, why this problem? Why this product? Is there a need you've identified? You've got some feedback from the market. Maybe it's a personal experience, something you have that sort of helps you to understand this is something that needs to be built. And then finally, it would be sort of a timing question. At the early stage, timing is probably, and luck is probably the most important factor in everything after team, right? There's just nothing you can do from a macro perspective to predict a market or to predict what the world is going to do. I think Jeff pointed out, interest rates go south, or I guess they'll go up, so they go north. But if that happens, what does that mean for appetite for investment? That could be a killer, a make or break for an early stage company. Just VCs aren't prepared to invest because of the macro environment. So I think understanding the timing and why now is the right time for me to invest is like the third sort of leg of the stool as I think about very early stage companies. So why you, why this, and why now would be the three things I would ask.
This question is up for anyone. How can industry and investors work together to promote the space economy?
I'm going to share just some personal experience on that, both from the investor side and the fundraiser side. So when I was a space investor, I did everything I could to show up at industry conferences and of course market the companies that we invested in, which I think any investor is going to want to do when they have that vested interest, and some are better than others at doing it. Now being back on the operator side of the table, we've been very lucky. So Hemisphere Ventures, for example, they sit as on the executive committee and patron board at the Commercial Spaceflight Federation. We've got investors who are super influential at various sovereign wealth institutes, at some of the big family office, how shall I call it, super nodes. And they talk about us a lot. Some of them are industry-specific investors in launch, in cybersecurity, and things like that. And they're out there talking about us, so that's very helpful. Some of our investors have a lot of transactional experience in areas that we're thinking about. So as we think about and further evolve our exit strategies, even though they're long term, we have a really, really smart and experienced investor base. So they come and help us set up the things that maximize our enterprise value today and more along the way. Talking about everything from how we structure our folders internally to a million other forms of internal optimization, to what do we want to do right now when we structure our raises, to which accounting systems we're going to use, all the way up to bigger strategic things about which customer bases do we want to focus on, which types of investor partners do we want to bring in. And so I think we tend to be a company that's just like very, very interactive with our investors and find a lot of value in that. So I would say those two things are really like advocacy and operational support.
I think one of the things that come to mind for me is, we're taking a very long perspective oftentimes with space tech. And so I think that's more than just the companies, and that's more than just the organizations that are currently involved, but looking at the talent pool for the future. So investing in building the talent you need for the future is pretty important. Starting at even the high school and university level, making sure that training is really there.
I'm going to give, I think, a sort of a caveat here. Be careful what you wish for. I think one of the interesting challenges with sort of new space versus old space is, the legacy players in the space industry a lot of the time are quite slow moving, right? And I think if you're a startup company, you can get sort of killed by their inertia. So I think you have to be very careful in terms of who you partner with and how you partner with sort of large legacy players in the industry. They can be very helpful, sure, as you think about them as a prime towards government programs and initiatives. Absolutely, they can be helpful there. But especially as you think, I think Jeff is a great term. I think I heard from you guys originally, sort of the unbundling of the primes, right? If I'm a small company and I'm looking to take a big piece of business from Boeing or from Northrop or somebody along those lines, I'm sure they'd like to keep me close and smother me with love to make sure I don't actually do that. So I think you have to be very careful in how you balance those sort of those priorities on your side versus the strategic priorities. And I worked for a corporate investor for about 6 or 7 years, who were fine, wonderful, did a good job most of the time. But I think it's important to remember that corporate priorities change like on a 6-month to sort of 12-month window, right? As sort of CEOs and GMs of various P&Ls rotate in and out and go do different things, the company can sort of shift its priorities, shift its resources, and your internal champion might be sort of given a sweet new gig in Shanghai or something along those lines, and all of a sudden you have to figure out how to build those relationships with the organization again. And in fact, Jeff, love to hear you. I know you guys at GM have been pretty successful in working with small companies. Any sort of thoughts around how startups can architect that and try and make sure both sides are successful?
Yeah, I mean, the business model is a big part of it. I joined GM 2 years ago. I'm a legacy aerospace and defense guy, so I'm kind of an example of the type of talent or background that the company's looking for to enter into new markets. And so, if you're going to enter a new market, you got to have subject matter expertise. You have to be open-minded about the business models. You have to be open-minded about technologies that look similar but are actually different, right? So what you're doing in, say, commercial automotive is very purpose-built, and it's a massive, global market that's very product-driven, high volume. And so there are things we do that are purpose-built for that model, and where there are niches or gaps, startups, there's various ways to, it's a make-buy decision. It's do you partner for it? Do you acquire it? Do you team on it? So the more, and I see this happening across all industries. I don't think this is any more true in automotive than it is anywhere else, which is that when companies start to think about their capabilities and how they participate in an ecosystem, they have to have extended partnerships. They have to think about different ways to bring their capabilities to market. They have to be more solution oriented. So startups are great at thinking about solutions to problems that either others aren't thinking about, or they're working on a very niche application that is relevant to a large company where, maybe we're 98% of the way there, but there's a 2% piece that we're missing. So I see a lot of it happening now, a lot more collaboration. This was true when I was much more active in the aerospace and defense sector. For years, every year I just saw this sort of the needle just ticking forward on how the ecosystem is expanding. And I would just flip it around and say, if large companies don't figure out how to collaborate and truly collaborate, I think your point about, large companies sometimes wanting to keep the smaller companies close for the reasons you said, I think that's true. So I think, the real collaboration that's win-win has to be the model, because if you're seen as a large company that is collaborating only on the surface just to keep companies close, that reputation is not going to help you over the long run. So I think the smart large companies understand that and don't take that approach. And I think it's just become a necessity for large companies to find ways to innovate internally and collaborate for innovation. So I don't think that's more true in the automotive space than other industry verticals. I saw it happening in aerospace. I saw it happening in defense. I see it now in automotive. So what we're talking about here, to me, applies whether you're talking about space or virtually any other commercial market. You have to find ways to expand your ecosystem. You have to think differently. You got to get outside your four walls. These are things that I've worked on, talked about, consulted on, as a consultant in-house, as an industry strategy person. I just think that the space market is an example of it, but I think it's true across almost every industry vertical that is something that just companies have to figure it out, or the other companies that do are going to get there first. So,
no, go ahead, Amir.
I was just going to go back to your original question about, how do investors combine with industry to progress the technology? And I'm in Los Angeles, so I'll use a beach metaphor. So I feel like we're kind of, we're swimming in the ocean here. Let's not ignore the potential tsunami that's coming. Like, who's the really big investor that's moving the needle here? And let's talk about groups like China and the Emirates. The US sees China as a shark and the Emirates as a dolphin, right? So China's got these armies of STEM capable workforce that they've been evolving over the last 15, 20 years and is now accelerating. UAE takes the very long-term view, as many of the OPEC countries do, and their vision that they laid out in 2017 was a 100-year plan to build a city on Mars. And the first 30 years of that plan is just about raising kids who know how to do this kind of stuff. And huge, large-scale educational programs to help them, build a more capable working middle class in the country and to help wean off natural resources. And so what is that going to mean for the US? Are we going to see a brain drain from the US to the Emirates as some startups seek that money potentially? Or are we going to see some kind of pull towards trying to get over all sorts of ITAR hurdles to be able to bring in investment from abroad? Who knows? But I just think that as we talk about, how, where the flow of capital is coming into the space industry, that we also have to look at some of the very big macro issues as well.
So I want to add a little bit to what Jeff mentioned earlier. I totally agree that companies, I think it's not just private investors, VCs, but also corporate investors, right? It's not just about investing in companies just so that they can get hands on the industry intel. But what I really believe that what we're still lacking today is really mature MMA from the large corporate down through all the ecosystem. Because what we're building here today is really not that different of an infrastructure build from, say, cellular technology, cell towers, all the way through the handsets and then application layer. So we're basically at the early stage of infrastructure building for space, and which is why you have the high capex and long-term capex and long-term ROIs. So if people could be patient enough and really take a long-term view, the corporate investors really want to foster that ecosystem, not only growing, but how do we create more exits, right? That will also encourage more private investors to come in. I think that's really a much more sustainable long-term model if we can all take a long-term view and trying to foster that MMA exit cycle.
Jeff Ryder, I was going to ask you a quick question. So having said everything that you did about GM Defense and industry and investors working together, if I'm a startup and I'm a space startup, I'm making a widget and I want to put it on the moon with you all, what's the best way to work with you or to talk to you about that?
I mean, the same way that I would do any, it starts with a conversation. I not to oversimplify it, right? I mean, I think it's the reason why we have these conferences. I'm listening and learning. First of all, it's fantastic dialogue. Again, we're an automotive company that's looking at this as something we're exploring to develop a vector towards, right? This isn't what the company is built around. So we're a little bit different. I think we're taking an interest in this area and we're exploring it. I think if we were a company that's it's their bread and butter, it's a little different. So at GM, I would just say, as anywhere else, it starts with a conversation, and we do a lot of ecosystem building in our team within GM at GM Defense, and we talk to. I'll say there's the supply chain conversation, and then there's the partner conversation, right? If it's a potential partnership dialogue, we want to know what people are doing. We want to know why they're doing it, how they think about the market, and sometimes it's just relationship building, and then you maintain that relationship, and it comes back later in a way you just didn't anticipate. In other cases, you're trying to plug something right in. You want to get a project going, so. I tend to think of partnership as a path to lots of different things. It could be an acquisition. It could be, a contract. It could be, part of your supply chain, or maybe you're part of their supply chain. I mean, one of the things we talk about is if you have an OEM mindset, but you're not willing to flip it around and participate in someone else's program or someone else's system, then you're losing an opportunity to find a revenue stream. So maybe I'm oversimplifying it, but a relationship starts with a conversation, and it's the technical solution and the business solution, and it's also how that company does what they do and if it fits into your culture. And we have a lot of those ongoing. So doors always open here.
Good to know. Thanks. I realized halfway through all of your incredible answers about industry and investors, this being a BMNT H4X Labs event and putting on my former government hat, I should also ask, any thoughts from the group on how our government partners can work with industry and investors to help promote the space economy?
I'll start.
So someone who came here for the blue economy portion of this, but is here early for Space Day and is really excited now to work with you all. What are your thoughts?
I mean, I'll start. I think we're all excited about privatization of space, but it's not a flip of a switch. I think it's very key for the government to stay involved and continue being a key customer for the space community for quite many years to come, right? So I think there's been so many good programs that emerged in the last few years. I mean, DIU, the AFWorks, there's a lot of new funding mechanism and contracting mechanism now that's really trying to speed up the acquisition cycle. That's really key. That's really facilitating a lot of some of the space startup to be able to get off the ground quicker. That said, I think you have to continue to participate, I think, for the next 5 to 10 years, just so that it's kind of not tailoring off in the help and let the on-ramp of the commercialization take place. So I think that patience needs to be there.
There's also the regulatory side of it is, the government can do everything that it can to open up those gates, whether it's FAA support for commercial human spaceflight or for UAVs. All that kind of support is very helpful. And then allowing commercial companies to piggyback on some of the marketing tentacles that the government has as its various buying agencies talk to the technology suppliers, get them connected with one another. As Jeff was saying, both as buyers of one another's and as sellers to one another's. So creating that, I don't know of a better word than like fostering as much of that interactive ecosystem as possible.
I might add that the government is doing a much better job at deploying funding to support a lot of these companies at the very early stages. That didn't used to be the case, but I think there's still a long way to go to improve sort of the pace of deployment, the quality of deployment, and better partner with the investment community to help do that. And I appreciate people could often see that it's sort of like self-serving, but I don't think that's really any different than the relationship they have with a lot of the prime contractors out there. And so I think better partnering to more quickly and efficiently deploy that capital into commercial enterprises and not necessarily companies that are trying to become a DoD body shop and live off of cyber grants. I think that's one area that there could be a lot of improvement, and companies or organizations and companies like BMNT are really helping tremendously with that.
Yeah, I might add, I agree with all of that. I think you have to recognize progress where it's been made. And, look, when DIU and some of these things were stood up, I live in DC, there was a lot of, back and forth about how real this thing is. It's small. It's, they're missing the point. I've seen and heard every angle on what I would call the innovation initiatives. But, the nominee for the head of DoD acquisition ran that group. So, you have to recognize that these are not just, stop-start. I believe they're not just stop-start initiatives. They're not, one administration's priority. I think there's real progress across that community of, works and you see some of that manifesting itself in terms of who's now being asked to run certain agencies. So I just think there's been real progress. I also see real development in the accelerator community, all the groups like folks here today that are supporting and driving these, that if you go back 8 years, there wasn't that much of this happening today. A lot of the groups that are represented here today didn't exist 8 years ago. So, and NASA itself, has championed other transaction authorities for a long time, actually, and way before they became very sort of topical. Those contract vehicles existed. If anything, they've just been accelerated and picked up by other agencies. So, there's history here. I think in the last 5 years, there's been real progress. And I think that bodes well for the kind of support that will continue to be available and grow for small companies entering the space.
One thing to add to that is, if you think about, why we require, speeding up of this innovation effort, we're brushing up against companies or countries like China that, at the drop of a dime can put the full weight of industry and government behind any kind of initiative they want. And so it's, it's just a fundamentally different system. But if we can curate or develop the ability to do that, under, our type of government, in system, it's just going to be a tremendous advantage over, any kind of bad actors.
I totally agree with that statement, by the way. I think it's actually a critical national priority to figure this out. And I think that's recognized in most circles. So
maybe this is a softball. It might also be an unfair question, but Jeff, since you're talking, I'll follow up with you. And you're also the only one with defense in your job title that I can see. How does the defense sector help the space industry? And is there any way that it hinders it?
Sure. So for GM Defense, the best way to think about us is we're a team within GM that's purpose built for government spec solutions, right? So we're a government contracting unit. That means we're able to work in the government market, and we have the business capabilities to do that, right? It's a fundamentally different market. You look at rate structure and contracts and all that stuff. So that's really the important way to think about our team. Look, I've been in this space for a long time. I think there's a rich and obvious history of, military and civil cooperation in space. You look at the companies that are in this space, they often tend to work on both sides of the house. And there's nothing surprising about that. That's the way that's the way the aerospace sector works, by the way. That's true for a lot of commercial aerospace. So to me, the two kind of go hand in hand. I don't tend to separate them in most cases in terms of the capabilities that companies have. I would also say that there is an emerging, space race, I think. And I think that's going to drive a lot of money. I mean, it shouldn't be mistaken what happened in the 60s and with the Apollo program and why. And, there's real money that's coming into this space on the back of government spending. And that created a lot of that ecosystem, whether you're, a large system integrator or a supplier. And that's really the driving force behind a lot of the capability that we see today. So I think there's a lot more commercial capability for sure in space. And I think the fact that you see commercial service models is fantastic. But there's still a lot of money, and there's going to be a lot more money coming in from both the civil and the military side of our government's interest in space. That's not going away. If anything, it's accelerating. So I don't think it's a hindrance. I think that's a natural part of the way this market works. I think when it comes to commercial, the only caution would be to make sure where it's purely commercial that you separate that from not just military, but government, right? I think for commercial business cases, they tend to want to be clean or pure. But you don't want to lose the opportunity to get in on a lot of money that's flowing into this market that's being, as it always has been, driven by government. So I guess it depends on your business model and your pitch, but there's going to be a lot more money coming this way. I think that's the way we look at it.
Well, that's good news. NASA did a really intelligent thing. They, and I'm just sharing our specific anecdote here on how the government can help. Before NASA put out an RFP of who gets to connect to the International Space Station, which new station will do that. A year and a half earlier, NASA did a low Earth orbit commercialization study, and they asked commercial industry, what questions should we be asking? So, that seems to be a very smart and helpful thing, both for government itself and for the community, is to say, what should we be asking? Now, when that question is asked, it has to be asked in a way that allows the companies to come back and share information without the fear of loss of IP and trade secret and all those things. And so we came up with a good mechanism with NASA for doing that, because as Jeff was saying, you need to maintain the possibility for dual use. And so, that's something that we thought was particularly effective of NASA and Congress to do.
So I have a few more questions.
And by the way, and 13 companies participated in writing those reports, so they got a pretty broad view on that.
That's great, and I appreciate it's very self-aware of NASA to say what questions should we be asking. Speaking of which, I do have some more questions, but I want to pause and throw it out to the audience. Open it up for any questions. I think we have about 15 minutes left, and I hope we have questions and willing to spend all of that on stuff that you folks are interested in. But it's an
Could I ask a question?
Open floor. Please.
So I have a question for you, Gareth. Both from your background at Qualcomm and now from your work at Promus, you've gotten a pretty deep understanding of investing in companies that have or don't have defense customers. I'm curious how you've seen your own knowledge and role evolve relative, let's say, to an organization like In-Q-Tel, because you didn't have that, that NGO sort of roots. You had a very, corporate venture and venture capital roots. And now how's that evolving along the lines of whether or not you choose to invest in companies with government customers?
So it's a great question. And I think a lot of venture investors, classic venture investors, would almost deprecate government revenue a little bit, right? They don't consider it quite as exciting as commercial enterprise or consumer revenue. I think our thinking on that is a little bit different. Most companies that we see in deep tech in general, whether it's space, aerospace, robotics, government is a significant and very important customer. Often, in fact, the lead customer for those companies as they sort of come out of the gate through things like SBIRS, for example, with various parts of the DoD or national intelligence apparatus in the US. We actually look at it very favorably, I have to say. I think our one concern, always and ever, is some of the dysfunction that we see, unfortunately, in the political system, right, where congressional appropriations mean that it's not going to be a multi-year contract you get from the DoD. It'll be a 12-month renewal. And, how do you sort of think about that from an ARR perspective if you're looking at a recurring business model? I think we've got comfortable with it, though. And certainly, we feel that there really is no substitute for a strong government sort of lead contract to demonstrate the value of a company when it comes out of the gate initially. That there's often a very easy path. In fact, many enterprise customers, you look at sort of sectors like Earth observation or weather data, where the government obviously has a very specific, use case and need, which you can sort of build on top of that to build a very strong enterprise offering. So actually, yeah, we're very, very positive around government revenue in general. I think Jeff, Seraph, you guys would probably have a very similar perspective, I would imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree with you. One of the things that we actually look for is the ability to curate, government grants. We view that as like force multiplying for a lot of the companies that we work with. So yeah, definitely agree with you, Gareth.
Totally. And I think, it's been interesting, just back to sort of the sort of question around the evolution of sort of government support for small companies. The dollar value we're starting to see out of some of the programs that folks like AFWorks are running, for example, is really, really significant and really transformative for the trajectory of some of these early stage companies. So we think it's a fabulous partner. We are big fans of the government business.
Yeah, thanks, guys. We did get a question from the audience about, it mentions Disrupt AD, Abu Dhabi's venture capital arm. And this is from the devil's advocate perspective. Why tinker with tiny US funds if you can offshore to the UAE's massive sovereign wealth fund? And as a guy, I personally lived in the UAE for 4 years, worked with investors there. I understand the value that they bring and the allure of that market and those networks. So why not just go offshore to other sovereign wealth funds? Or I should say that's a very US centric perspective. You might already be in the UAE, but let's say talking about US startups, why not just shortcut, go to those big funds?
A quick answer to that is, CFIUS rules. There are a lot of challenges, in terms of companies that are dual use, having foreign ownership from specific companies. So it's not as easy as just offshoring it, because that can create issues down the line, which we have seen some space companies in the recent past have to deal with, and it's not really helpful to progressing the company. It can delay them literally by a year or two. So yeah, that's just my quick take on it.
There's
Yeah,
two
I
other
think
things I can think of just off the top of my head for why you would want to use U.S. U.S. monies first. One is it's easier to farm your own backyard than to go abroad for, like you said, CFIUS, but also because of personal networks and things like that, and introductions and all that. It just lends itself more to local work. And the other is speed. U.S. investors tend to be very fast in their various classes relative to investors from abroad. So if you look at a corporate venture arm coming out of the U.S. versus one coming out of Europe, just because the U.S. ones have more transactional experience and it's local and all sorts of other reasons, it's just that money's available earlier. It might also be that there are certain vehicles that are available here that are much harder to work with abroad, like venture debt, for example. I personally don't know of many venture debt sources outside the U.S. that I could work with like I could with the ones from here. So there's a bunch of reasons why somebody would source money internally. It's not just about the check size.
Yeah, and I'll add on to that. From my experience, just working with startup companies and also at Virgin, talking to some people looking for equity. The earlier the company is, the more high touch it is. They need a lot of help. So we're working with the local investors. They can give you a lot more, to Amir's point, network connections, how to navigate the defense acquisition network, the different business model needs or introductions that you need, or even just help them. A lot of times just talking to startup founders, teach them how to do sales. Very simple things. I think those are some of the things that's hard to get from an overseas, much larger fund investor.
They're all great points. And I'm really excited because now the questions are rolling in with 9 minutes left. We have a few really good questions. Can industry sustain the number of small sat launch companies that are currently operating? So this is about the many launch startups out there.
I can give you a one-word answer. No.
No. I think the last I tracked last year or so, I stopped tracking them. It's like 150. We just don't need that many. But I also believe that the market will sort itself out. So,
I mean, I don't think it's a bad thing. I mean, I think the fact that there are 150 super passionate teams working on this, you've got a vast sort of network of talent, which is sort of getting familiar with how you build very complicated systems like launch vehicles. We think it's a good thing. We obviously have a bet in that market. Monica and the team at Virgin are doing some really interesting things around launch. There's a couple of others that we feel are going to be fine, but I think the vast majority of the long tail of those companies are going to find it very, very challenging to survive. I mean, and then, sorry, back to just a caveat here. I think a couple of people have talked about China, which is a bit opaque to us as US investors, like the number of sort of small launch companies or small payload launch companies working in China, like they can afford to throw, or they will probably throw many of those. And who knows how many of those will survive, but I don't know commercially if they'll be, sustainable.
I mean, a lot of the China small launch company, I believe, are state funded, right? Whether they say it or not. And I also believe that they're really targeting more domestic market because their constellations being built in China, and given the language barrier, I think their primary target is really the Chinese market with international ambition. But I think that will take a bit of time.
Yeah, I think national government support. Jeff Cruzy and I both worked in the satellite industry prior to our jobs now together, and we used to look around at what we would call pride sats, the companies that governments would launch, or the satellites that governments would launch and maintain that wouldn't necessarily meet certain bandwidth economic justification, but they're launching them because they're a national asset and they're supporting them. So I would see something similar, a similar pattern with small launch. Speaking of which, another question from the audience: how do we convince government that this is a domain that needs attention?
I think they're pretty convinced already, to be fair.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, the establishment of the Space Force, the NASA budget just got plussed up 6%. I mean, I think there's broad awareness of the opportunity, and I would even say the need.
The best way to get the U.S. government more interested, I guess, I would boil it down to one word: Sputnik. I mean, so long as other governments are launching, and doing things in space that keep us on our toes, that's probably the single strongest ingredient in keeping government interested.
So if anyone here has not watched it, For All Mankind is a show on Apple TV Plus, I think, that's an alternate history in which the Soviets reached the moon first. And that's the premise. Now what? And it kicks off this space race in the 60s, which I think a lot of people are seeing parallels to today. And it's a really interesting narrative.
I haven't finished, so don't give away the ending yet.
I'm barely through season 1.
Okay.
There was a follow-on question about small sat launch. If there will be an industry shakeup, and it sounds like you all agree that there will be, if there will be an industry shakeup in small sat launch companies, will investors lose hope and confidence in space?
I don't think so. I don't think so, because there's several very good companies right now, and I think it'll create a sustainable business model. And all investors understand that it's not 100% of companies. Actually, a small handful, right? When you make a venture investment, you expect a very small set of the total investment to actually come to fruition and hit it big. So I think that's just part of the. I think that it would be accepted just part of the statistics.
Yeah, that's just sort of part of innovation, is sort of that creative destructive cycle. It kind of reminds me of the automotive industry. Many years ago, there were tons of different car companies building electric, steam-powered, combustion engines, all different types, more than you could shake a stick at. And then, there was a shakeout, and there were a few winners that persisted, for many years to come. And so I think, that's just going to, follow that same sort of model.
And I'm dating myself, but anybody who was involved in the Telesat, explosion in the late 90s. I mean, how many fell out of that? I'm guessing there were, dozens. And when it was all said and done, there were just a couple. So, we've been here before. And to the points that have been made, I think that's all good. I think that's part of the process. I mean, all that learning, all that innovation, it pulls through. And I think that risk is embedded into the point you just made, that there are going to be winners and losers, and I think that's known. So, but it is cyclical, right? We went through a huge ramp in the late 90s, and it kind of came down pretty quickly on the other end. But it also led to the structure of the industry and the market, that emerged afterwards. So it's all part of the process.
I just want to thank whoever wrote this last question from the audience, because it's actually better than my final question was going to be. And it hits on a few themes here. Again, this is the next phase in space. So the question is, how do you keep the general public in support of space, alluding to the sentiment that space isn't worth it and we should focus on earthly problems?
I'll go first. I think it's a great question. I'll pick on NASA a little bit. If anyone's ever tried to watch the NASA station on your DirecTV or whatever your provider is, I mean, that's a tough watch. These are not professional marketers, and yet there's so much excitement that can be pulled out of all of these efforts. And that's where this is what commercial companies do. So I would just say the collaboration, again, is an opportunity for commercial companies who are customer and market minded, which, let's be honest, that's not the U.S. government's focus. There's opportunity, I think, to help broadcast all the awesome stuff that's underway right now, and I think is only going to continue. So we talk a lot about technical solutions, but I think part of the branding and excitement that industry can bring to this is a way to help get folks excited. So I think there's a role for industry that goes beyond just solving the hard technical problems.
Oh, I'll give an example. So I was just at Cornwall. That's one of our Spaceport locations, and talking to a lot of the local residents. I think it's really important to be able to connect space solution to people's lives. Most people don't understand how important space is, how much their current lives are already tied to space, and what new space solutions can do to improve their daily lives. When I was at Cornwall, a very big topic there is sustainability and protecting the ocean. You can really see the light bulbs go off when people understand that, you can use these satellites to monitor ocean health and really solve some of the pollution problems that they have. So I think we need to do a better job as an industry, just really trying to connect it to people's everyday lives on Earth.
I was going to add a couple of ingredients to that. One is keep reminding people what percentage of the national budget space is. That's an important point when they see how small it is. The second is keep showing the benefits. So ISS National Lab puts out a book every year called Benefits to Humanity of all the technology that's then parlayed terrestrially and how it helps people. Last thing is keep, like along the lines of marketing that Jeff was saying, is keep making those movies. We're going to be doing some stuff in space over the next 3 to 5 years. It's already in works that we are not talking about yet. It's going to make the Baumgartner jump look like child's play, but a lot of fun stuff going to attract people's attention.
I would add, generate interest, in educationally, because I think that's contagious, and showing people that there are tools that we can use that are available today that weren't available before, that are based on data that came from space. Can go a long way, and it's a different world we live in. We're not counting cars by hand anymore, and that's really cool.
And I think one final thing that is, I think, pretty influential is we have a couple of very high profile sort of high net worth individuals who are dedicated a significant sort of part of their resources to going out and doing something off the terrestrial service. Like you look at, I think somebody mentioned the Elon effect, a few minutes ago. There's no denying that having people like Musk, having people like Jeff Bezos, having people like Richard Branson out there flying the flag and doing this because I think, it's cool. Sure, it gets them lots of publicity, but I think that's inspirational for a lot of people. And it's something that we probably could do a better job at sort of the investment community, sort of the business community, and sort of piggybacking on top of that, right? Sort of the excitement they're generating for space activity.
I think it's a perfect note to end on. Hopefully we've inspired some of that activity today. Amir, Monica, Jeff, and Gareth, I want to thank you all so much for your time. Thanks to our hosts, and thanks to the audience for being here and for the great questions towards the end. Everyone have a great day, and we'll see you again next time. Take care.